Intelligence weapons are my favorite kind of weapons. They're so versatile. There's so many neat options for hacking and slashing and stabbing and all these cool things you can do with them. They're really big, smart weapons, intelligence. I just think they're neat. Anyway, here is my ranking of all of the intelligence weapons. Let's go.
How neat is that?
Let me know your favorite intelligence weapons in the comments down below. And for clarity, we're only doing weapons. We're not doing staffs or seals that have intelligence scaling. We're only doing things that natively have intelligence scaling. There are over 30 of these bad boys, I think. So we'll go through some of these weaker ones pretty quickly just to not waste your time on talking about terrible weapons. And then we'll get into the nitty gritty stuff. So we'll start out with the F tier. Now there's only one weapon on this list, and that is the Ghostflame Torch. This is really a torch. It's not technically a weapon, but it is a weapon, so it goes on this list, but it's a torch. So yeah, I mean, it has got like frostbite on it, but I mean, I don't really know why you would use this as a weapon, to be honest, but it's a weapon, so it goes here. It's in the F do not use tier, but anyway, we'll move on. We'll go on to D tier. Now, in D tier, at the very bottom of this tier, we have the Bastard Stars. Now, this is a flail weapon that mostly scales with dex and intelligence. It's got it says it's unique. It's not really unique. The Nebula weapon skill on it. There is a weapon that shares this that is significantly better in almost every way, so we'll cover that a little bit later, and that's partly why this gets knocked down into D, and it's also not a very super good flail. Flails don't have the best attack animations. It's even better flail in the intelligence line anyway, so that's why it's at the bottom of my D tier. Next, we have Alabaster's Lord's Sword. This is a great sword which scales mostly with intelligence and strength. Now, this weapon is so low on this list because there are so many other better great swords in the intelligence category alone, and when you kind of compare them in that way, it's why it gets bumped down further into this list. Plus, Alabaster's Lord's Pull is like a souped up version of like Gravitas, and I don't really ever understand why you would use Ash of War, so just like pull enemies towards you because they're coming towards you anyway. So I don't really like those Ash of Wars, just personally as a preference, so it gets kind of knocked down a little bit from that too. But if you want to use this weapon, you absolutely can, but it is in the D tier. Now we'll get into some daggers. Now there's 3 daggers. There's the Ivory Sickle, the Crystal Knife, and the Glintstone Kris. Now the Ivory Sickle and the Crystal Knife are essentially the same in most ways. They have the exact same quick step on them. You can't change the Ash of War, and they're daggers, so they're very fast attack weapons that scale with dex and intelligence in this category. Glintstone Kris is basically the same, except it has Glintstone Dart on it, which is a different Ash of War that can be used from range, so it gives it a little bit more variety. But daggers in general aren't the best, so they do tend to sit lower on this list, especially with these where you can't change the Ash of War, so you can't put status effects on them, which is the main reason why you would use daggers, because you can put status effects on them to apply status effects faster. But they're basically all the same, more or less, and that's why they're all going here in D tier. Actually, do you know what? Stop the video. Stop editing.
Stop the bloods!
Stop it all. Let's change this. Let's put Glintstone Kris into C tier. I actually think, now that I'm thinking about it, Glintstone Dart is significantly better than Quick Step on these daggers. Even though you can't put a status effect on it, you could put this as like your secondary weapon and like just have it switch to it to use a bit of a ranged option. There's a lot of value in that, actually, now that I think about it. So yeah, let's put this at C. Let's put Glintstone Kris in C tier. It's like a secondary weapon, definitely not a primary. Yeah, let's do that. All right, anyway, moving on. Family Heads is next, and this is another flail, so it suffers from all the same issues as Bastard Stars, except it actually has a better Ash of War on it. The Familian Rancor is actually not bad. It gives you some decent ranged options as well that you can use. So a bit more flexibility, still with the same issues that flails struggle with, but definitely an option that you could pick up, and it has okay scaling for a flail if you're looking in like the dex line specifically. Next, we have the hammer itself, the Scepter of All Knowing. Now, this hammer is terrible in all facets of the word, but there is one single use for it. The weapon skill Knowledge Above All does negate magic and holy damage to everyone around you, including yourself. So this is really only usable in like PvP. It has virtually no use in any other scenario, and this hammer just is not scaling well. It's just got poor combos. It's just not great as a whole, but I could definitely see people using it in PvP, so that's just calling that out. But every other reason why it goes into D tier. Moving on to the C tier. We're getting into some more interesting weapons now. Now we'll start out with the Onyx Lord's Greatsword. This is a curved greatsword that has the Onyx Lord's Repulsion on it, which is like a reverse of Gravitas. It pushes enemies away rather than pulling them towards you. I still don't really like it. Ash of War isn't great. The attack combos on these curved greatswords are okay. That's why it's going in C. It's got better scaling and strength and intelligence than some of the other weapons if you fully upgrade it. It's not bad. We'll move on to the next greatsword, which is the Helfin's Steeple. This is another intelligence scaling greatsword, and there's still 2 more to go. That is the Ruinous Ghostflame Ash of War on it, which is okay. I really wish that initial like slash did more damage. It's a bit more pronounced, whereas it's mostly just putting the Ghostflame and Frostbite on the weapon, which doesn't make a lot of sense when the other two great swords already have Frostbite on them already without having to use an Ash of War just to apply it. So that's why it's sitting in this tier, but it is a little bit stronger than the other one in my opinion. The next is the Rosix Axe, and this is a tough one. Axes again struggle from a combo issue where they don't have really good combos, and the Ash of War on this one is just utterly terrible. Rosix summons is not great. It misses all of the time. It's very hard to hit the 3 skeleton slashes on one enemy, and when it does, it's not even that powerful, so that's why it's sitting in C tier. Next, we've got 2 swords that I'm going to do together because they're basically exactly the same. It's the Crystal Sword and the Rotten Crystal Sword. They scale almost the same, except the Rotten Crystal Sword has less physical and magical damage in favor of doing a slight amount of Scarlet Rot buildup. So it's not great really in that regard. Now, both of these weapons just have pretty much exactly the same everything else. It's spinning slash. You can't change the Ash of War, can't infuse it with anything. It's just like same. There are better swords. There are so much more better weapons that you could absolutely use. So that's why both of these are going here. The Crystal Spear is next, and this is a just standard spear that is crystal, similar to like the Crystal Sword and Rotten Crystal Sword. It's a spear. It has an Ash of War you can't change on it, so you can't really do anything special with it. It's just impaling thrust. It does physical and magic damage. It scales okay with dex, but everything else pretty averagely. It's not bad. Spears are okay because you can hold your shield and do a little piercy thing that I like to do, but we'll move on to the Troll's Knight Sword, which is a colossal sword. And again, there are better colossal swords, which is what knocks this down a little bit as well. Plus, Troll's Roar is pretty terrible. Now, this will knock enemies back, and then you can follow up with like a slam on the ground. It's all right. You know, if you're really surrounded by enemies, it's not bad, but it's not great. There's so much more better options. The Sword of Saint Trina is next, and this is just another sword, so typical sword combos, but there is the Mist of Slumber and the Slumber build-up on it, which makes it entirely unique, and that's why it bumps up a little bit into this category at like the top of C, potentially B. But the thing with Slumber is it's just not great. Like, I don't really see much of a point in like using the sleep build up to like knock things down and make them sleep for a little while. It's just like, just kill them, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, there could be more in this, like maybe in the expansions, hopefully, fingers crossed, maybe sleep will get expanded in some way. But yeah, this is why this weapon goes at the top of the C tier. Moving on to B, we're going to start out with the Death Ritual Spear. This is another spear, but it actually has a good Ash of War on it in Spear Core Ritual. All of the same typical spear things, except this will rain like death down into like these spikes and deal damage to everything around you. It does magic damage, which is perfect for intelligence. It's actually pretty solid to deal like AoE damage to everything in front of you. Really like this spear as an alternative to using something else. Next is the Colossal Sword, the Royal Greatsword. This is our favorite homie's greatsword that you get at the end of his quest. I won't say anything more than that, but it's got such a cool Ash of War on it, the Wolf's Assault, where you deal like cold damage. You jump up in the air and like you land down and deal the frostbite damage to enemies. It's decent in terms of that. It's also got really good scaling when you do level it up in strength, dex, and intelligence. So it's not bad weapon as a whole, except it is a colossal weapon, and there is a better colossal weapon in this category itself, so it gets knocked down a little bit because of that, but it's still a really solid weapon. And I almost want to make a build just like using it as like some kind of like Frost Knight thing, just because I really like the Wolf's Assault Ash of War. All right, we'll move on to Loretta's War Sickle, and this is my favorite sickle in the game, and that's partly why it's sitting in the B tier. Loretta's Slash, the Ash of War, is not bad, but it's not great. I really wish there was a wave of it, like a magic wave that came off it, rather than just like you swinging in like a magic attack. But the uniqueness about this is that its standard like attacks are unique. They're not the same as like your typical halberds, so they're more of like a slash rather than that weird like slam down that the halberd does. This means the attack animations are faster and a little bit better, but it's not as good as say some of the other weapons in these bigger weapon kind of classes. But it's got a lot of things going for it that I really like about this weapon. Moving on to the Carrion Knight's Sword. Now this sword is pretty solid. We've got better swords on this list again, it's just why it knocks it down. Really what makes this sword special is its Ash of War. The Ash of War, the Carrion Grandeur, like builds the sword up, and you can like charge it to like make the great sword bigger, and then you like slam it down in front of you. It does heaps of damage to everything like directly in front of you. The downside here though is that it's just like an attack in front of you. There's no real like super range to it. It does okay damage. It is just a sword. It's still good. Definitely could see this being used, but there are much better options, especially in like a sword category if you're going for say like a sword and staff kind of build. And that's also partly why it sits right next to Lazulai's Glintstone Sword. Now in my mind, both of these swords are relatively similar in like their power level. The Glintstone Pebble on the Ash of War of the Glintstone Sword is probably a little bit weaker, but I think they're both sitting in about this kind of B spot here. Now, Glintstone Pebble itself is exactly the same as the sorcery that you would use. It does seem to do a little bit more damage, I think, than just like the typical sorcery, especially if you buffed it with like your Spellblade stuff. But I think it's a decent weapon that you could use if you were looking to use something like that with a little bit of a ranged option without going too far into actually using sorceries. Not a bad option as like a knight hybrid kind of build. I don't mind this kind of sword. Meteoric Ore Blade is next. Now, this is a katana weapon. Katanas have like my favorite combos in the game, but it does have Gravitas as its skill. We've already discussed that I don't like Gravitas, but because it is a katana itself, it does get bumped up the list a little bit here. It does have decent strength and int scaling, which is unique in the katana class because most of the katanas are like dex and int or dex and whatever, but this scales with strength more than it does with dex, so it's unique in that regard. However, it's still like not great in terms of the others. It's also got that unique heavy attack where you like slam down like a downward slash compared to the normal one. It's all right, but it's not my favorite. Now, these next two weapons, I considered putting them in the A tier, but they fall in this like weird B to A tier hybrid where I don't love them, I don't hate them, but they're still pretty solid. So let me know what you think about this. So the first one is the Falling Star Beast Jaw. Now, this weapon, a colossal weapon, so it has a relatively slow general attacks. However, the Ash of War on it is super valuable to use. This is Gravity Bolt, and this is like unique to this weapon, and you just shoot the weapon up in the air and you deal the Gravity Bolt. And the bolt itself is really powerful. It staggers enemies like you wouldn't believe. Like the poise damage on this is nuts. It will knock enemies down very quickly, and they essentially just like stand there being constantly like locked out of their animations and just taking damage from the weapon. It's very powerful in that regard. The downside is though that it is a colossal weapon, so if you're not actually using the Ash of War on it or keeping your distance and really timing your attacks well, you will struggle with it, and that's why it ended up in this B tier. And it's the same reason why the Ruins Greatsword ended up in this B tier as well. Same thing, very slow animations, got to be careful when you choose to go on the offensive. However, the Ash of War is just ridiculously powerful. The Wave of Destruction, it's another gravity Ash of War, and you like have this gravital force in front of you when you slam down the weapon. Does heaps of damage in a wave in front of you. You can just like one-shot a lot of enemies with this. Both of these weapons could definitely be in the A tier, and I could definitely consider it, but I think they're just because they're colossal weapons and the other than the Ash of War, they just don't have the greatest skills. That's why they finished in the B tier. All right, we are moving on to the A tier, and we are very close to the end. We've only got a few weapons left, so let me know in the comments if you're still here at this point in the video. But we'll move on to the bottom of the A tier, and it's another colossal sword, funnily enough, but this is the Star Scourge Greatsword. Now, the reason this one goes in A and the others didn't, and it's simply because of how unique this weapon is. Now, it's got a great Ash of War on it, Star Caller Cry. You like shout in the air, then you can slam the weapons down, does heaps of damage, etc., etc. However, the issue that I have with colossal weapons in general is how slow their standard attack animations are, except this one is entirely unique in that if you two-hand it, you pull out an extra greatsword and you have unique animations from that, allowing you to attack faster because you're attacking with both weapons. It does much better like combos in general because of that, and that's why it really stands out to me as like fitting in this A tier in the way that is unique compared to the other colossal weapons. It also scales really well with strength, ending up at B scaling when you max it out. It's a really fantastic weapon. Next is the Death's Poker Greatsword, and this is one of the greatswords I mentioned earlier that does have frostbite in it in general. It also scales with strength and dexterity better than it scales with intelligence, so it struggles a little bit in that regard. However, it's still a really solid weapon, and its Ghostflame Ignition is really interesting. It is a like poke animation, then the Ghostflame comes, and if you do a light attack, you do like a slash. If you do a heavy attack, you like explode the Ghostflame. It's really cool in that regard. It's like a really interesting weapon that you could make some kind of Ghostflame build out of, wearing like some kind of unique armor and make some Ghostflame build out of that I really like. And it's a decent weapon overall, but it's not the best greatsword, and that's why it's in the A tier. Next is the Curved Sword Wings of Astel. Now, this is the weapon that I mentioned earlier with the Bastard Stars that shares the Nebula Ash of War. The Ash of War here is a little bit smaller than it is on the Bastard Stars. However, it's not the main strength with this weapon. Because it is a curved sword, it has great combos in just its general attack animations, and it has the unique heavy attack that shoots a magic projectile as well. So it's really unique in that regard. Now, the cool thing about it being like a curved sword like this is you could put another curved sword in your offhand, say like a weapon that has frost on it or something like that, and you could have both of them scaling with magic or intelligence, and then you could like use the curved sword, which have great like dual wielding animations that you could use, and then you've got the Ash of War for the flexibility to deal like some AoE damage, and then if you want a little bit of range damage, you've got the R2 ability to use that magic projectile. Huge amount of flexibility for this weapon that I really like. It scales really well with intelligence as well, and then a little bit into dex. Just a fantastic weapon all around. Next, we'll move on to the Clayman's Harpoon at the top of the A tier. I struggled with where to position this one, but I think it just fits in here really neatly. Now, this weapon as a whole, it's just a spear. You probably don't think much of it. It's got physical and magic damage as they all do. It scales with strength, dex, and intelligence. Not great scaling in like the whole grand scheme of things, but what's really unique about this is that you can actually put Ashes of War on it, which with most of these weapons on this list, you cannot do. You can't change the Ash of War. This one you can, meaning that you can put something like Ice Spear on it, and it just becomes this like unique like Frost Knight kind of build where you can just like stab people with this Ice Spear, and it does the cold damage and the frostbite because of that. It's really cool in that way, and I think that this is like one of the best spears in the game. You can do that hold shield pokey thing that I love to do as well. It's a fantastic weapon, and because of the flexibility in that is why I think it fits in this A tier as like a really unique option to use in terms of weapons. Moving on to the S tier, we've got 3 weapons in this list, and you've probably heard of them all before, and the first one is the Dark Moon Greatsword. It's the best greatsword in the intelligence line. It has the Moonlight Greatsword effect on it, which gives you the unique R2 effect where you can do like a frost wave in front of you. It's a fantastic weapon. It has frostbite built up on it. It scales with intelligence perfectly. It's fantastic. I made a build about this weapon, which you should go and check out if you haven't already. But we'll move on to the next one, which is the Sword of Night and Flame. This is the best straight sword out of all the straight swords that we have mentioned on this list. It does physical, magic, and fire damage. Super unique in that regard. It's on this list because it scales with intelligence, but it also scales with faith. Both of those are its 2 main scaling effects. It's a really weird weapon in that way. Its Ash of War is super cool and unique. However, the magic attack, the Knight version of that stance, is the only one that actually scales with intelligence. The fire attack doesn't, so you have to use the magic attack if we're talking about like intelligence, but it's just a fantastic weapon. That's why it sits in the A tier. The best intelligence weapon is the Moonveil Katana. It's my favorite weapon in the game, I would say. It's fantastic. I love the katanas. The transient moonlight attack is awesome, where you sheath the weapon and then you can like pull it out either in a horizontal or a vertical stab, depending on the attack you want to do. It does a magic wave, which is what I think Loretta's Slash should do, by the by. It's fantastic. I just think this weapon is fantastic in all regards. It scales with dex and int at B at max level, and it's like better than most of the scaling in a lot of other weapons. It's got great damage. We don't really need to say too much about this weapon because most people know everything about it. So that is my list. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of this list. Would you change anything, add, remove, etc.? Thank you for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.